The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Hello there, Shifties, and welcome back to the Shift podcast. I'm so excited to be here today with not only a brilliant physician, but also a really brilliant dear friend, Dr. Rachel Brown. Rachel and I met actually doing some work as it relates to burnout and work-life integration, and tell you a little bit about Rachel, and then we're just going to go at it today, Shifties. Rachel's a family physician. How many years, Rachel?
25. Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Rachel's a corporate wellness specialist, and she's an expert on, we're going to call it healthcare burnout. But one thing I want to start off by asking Rachel is, I go around the country. I know you work with a lot of different healthcare systems. Out there in the space, I hear burnout, but people are getting burned out on burnout. So sometimes I call it the B word. Then I hear people say work-life integration, which I learned from you. I hear people say work-life balance. I hear people say life-work balance. I'm going to shout out to UPenn because they call it life-work balance. Out at Providence, they call it work-life harmony. So shout out to Providence. What are you hearing? Anything different?
All of those things. I myself have shifted from work-life balance to life-work harmony, which is kind of another twist on what you've thrown out there. And honestly, when I'm talking to people and asking them to define for me what it is they're looking for, that's what's important to me. And if they happen to land on any of those word packages, then I know what they mean. I'm like you. I try to avoid burnout and even the word resilience now, because those are overused, sadly, in the line of work that I do, where I'm working with individuals, groups, and organizations around how to literally re-hardwire our brains to manage stress better. The actual medical term is neuroresilience. And so we do have to use that term from time to time. But yeah, I just try to meet people where they are and find out what they would like, how they'd like to refer to it. And let's face it, you know this, Andrea, it's really more of a vibe than it is, the right term or definition.
100%. And a lot of it is the culture.
Yep.
So the culture is going to pick up their own language. But I have to tell you, thank you for saying neuro resilience, because that's a new term. And one thing I wanted to mention, this is a fairly new podcast. I'm really excited about it. And just a quick reminder to anyone new that's joining the Shifties. This podcast, the genesis was really, when you think about a shift is from moving from one place to another, a change in direction, a change in tendency, a change in position. And so I'm bringing all my incredible guests on to talk about a shift in their life that's made an impact or a difference. And we're going to hear about that today. I'm going to ask you some questions, Rachel. Hopefully you'll give us a lot of words of wisdom. And the other piece is, we want to encourage people to get into healthcare, because what we hear out there is short staffing. Why would you want to get into healthcare? And myself and all my guests are here to say it's such a great profession, and we really change lives. We make the impossible possible. So we want this to be inspirational and motivational. And one of the first things I want to ask you is, tell me a little bit. I love this. You've shared this with me multiple times. Tell me about the difference in how the B word, work-life harmony, work-life integration shows up in men versus how it shows up in women.
Yes, absolutely. So this was something of special interest to me as a woman in healthcare. And let's face it, in our nursing population, it's predominantly female. And it wasn't being talked about a lot, Andrea, but there is a great deal of research about it. So I took it upon myself to find out, what do we know about this? And the reality is that women have a few differences in how this manifests and how they respond to the types of stressors and challenges that cause burnout in everyone in healthcare. So the first thing is, they will more likely feel that sense of lack of accomplishment, like they're not making a difference, before a man will. So if you remember the three components of burnout, there's emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of feeling of accomplishment. And what we find is that men don't tend to get there where women will. We can postulate all day long about why that is and why women tend to never feel like they're enough. That's a sentiment I hear a lot in women in healthcare. So that's one difference that we know. For me, what's more impactful is how women respond and try to solve for that burnout. And again, we're talking about a phenomenon that generally you don't recognize in yourself until after it's happened, right? You get to that place and you think, I just can't do this anymore. And then maybe a few months down the road, you realize, I was burnt out. But even without recognizing it as burnout, women will tend to go part-time before men will. Women will seek different types of roles, maybe outside of direct patient care. That might be leadership, which could get them in a little bit more trouble if they're feeling overwhelmed, or it might be highly rewarding for them. They might go in a completely different direction and pursue a different passion outside of healthcare. That tends to happen before it does in men. And so what we end up seeing is a lot of women, part-time women in the healthcare field, who are juggling just as much as if they had been full-time. And maybe that's not really solving the problem overall for the system, or maybe even for that individual.
That's really well said. And would you say that men, one of the first things, do they show up as being exhausted?
Their first trait. Now, of course, everything we're talking about today, Andrea, and to all the shifties out there, we know is a generalization, right? You may run across men and women who respond differently, but overall, the research shows that men actually respond with depersonalization first. And honestly, in healthcare, that's not uncommon for all of us to step back a little bit, because if it hurts, right, because we can't serve our patients the way we want to, or we're feeling frustrated with policies and those kinds of things, depersonalization is a natural human reaction to that. And so what you see is that's what men tend to do first. We start to see that cynicism first. That's one of the signs that someone might be getting burnt out and feeling depersonalized. And then, yes, they will also have that emotional exhaustion. Women and men tend to have that at the same rate.
I'm very transparent, and I share with my presentations all over the country that I myself suffered from burnout more than once in my career. And as a younger nurse, 20 plus years ago, I didn't even recognize what it was because we really didn't have a label for it. And if we did, it wasn't as talked about as it is today. So a couple of my big symptoms of burnout and how I reacted would be, I was very cynical and critical. And exhausted. Yep. Can you talk about a time how that presented, how you presented, and then what was a shift in your career? What made you make the shift?
Yes. Well, like you, Andrea, I have gone through this a couple times too, and it's looked different because each time you learn things, right? And then learn what you didn't know. And I suspect for folks listening to this, that will also be their life path. You know, at some point they will have experienced this, maybe multiple times. The first time I was naive about what was going on, right? And it manifested very much as cynicism, just like you. I felt very critical about everything going on around me. I remember being highly, highly impatient and thinking awful things, like, you know, in the grocery store line, the person in front of me taking a long time, and thinking something horrible, like, if I did this in my job, you know, people would die or people would get hurt, which is just preposterous and, you know, really not lacking in humanity, honestly. But I thought I was wearing my mask and my cape well every day until I finally did say, you know, I've got to go. I'm toxic. I'm miserable. I'm not being the wife I want to be. I'm not being the mother I want to be. I'm not being the doctor I want to be. And about 6 months later, I went back to my old place of work, which was a residency, just to visit my residents for graduation. And they all said, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Brown, you look wonderful. You look so happy. We're so glad you quit." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, look at you. You're obviously happy." I was like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "You were horrible before you left." It's not. I was wonderful. I was the best attending you had. But I realized we may think we're doing a great job of covering it up, and we're not. And it's just going to manifest, whether that means errors while we're taking care of the people we're taking care of, and that could be in our personal lives or at work, whether it means physical health, issues. I had gained a lot of weight at that time too. So yeah, there was a reckoning where I realized, wow, this is not who I want to be. And here's where the shift came. About 6 months later, honestly, Andrea, for the first 6 months, I just rested. I just healed. I tried to sleep. I tried to do fun things, hang out with my children. And then 6 months into it, I got mad. I was angry. I was angry that I felt any amount of shame that I had to leave the medical field. I was angry that someone so passionate about wanting to take care of people and teaching people how to take care of people couldn't make it, that I couldn't stay, that I would have gotten sick, that I would have, destroyed my relationships, whatever that happened to be. I was just mad. What kind of system would allow that to happen? Now, that doesn't mean I don't take ownership of my part in that, but that's what led me to start really looking into what causes burnout in healthcare workers. And the rest is history. That's the lane that I've chosen, and that's what I've been working on ever since. But people laugh when they say that it was anger that drove me, but it really was. It was a sense of injustice that we've got to do a better job, because good care providers, good healthcare team members should not feel like they have to leave to make sure their own well-being is okay.
That's so well said. You said something that I thought about. We become cynical and critical of the people that we really signed up to take care of. Did this happen to you? Did you start to feel cynical and critical of yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So all of those, right? I started to feel angry about certain patients that maybe wouldn't do what I'd asked them to do, or maybe it took up a lot of time, right? I was angry with colleagues who didn't move as quickly as I wanted them to move, or our front desk staff, why is it this way? But I think is where that shame came from, right? And especially when I left, angry with myself because I was beating myself up. When the residents told me, oh my gosh, you were horrible, then I had to go through that again. Like, oh my, was I? I was really bad, wasn't I? I was horrible to be around. Lots of apologies to my husband and my children and all of those things. And so, yes, very, very critical of my own behavior, which again, I own any part of that was mine. But then as I began to learn more about burnout, realizing I wasn't set up for success, and neither is anyone else in our current healthcare system. And so what can we do to make sure that these highly, highly, I have to say it, resilient people maintain that resilience and are able to keep doing what they love doing?
Yes, I love what you said. And something else I just pulled out.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do? What can we do? And I was the same way. I was critical of myself. I was angry with myself because I know that I wasn't showing up at my best.
Yeah.
And that was a hard pill to swallow.
Yes.
And it really is. And I think one thing that I learned is, I think what's a really good nugget when we talk about the shift is having people in your life that recognize that you're struggling, and having people in your life that are able to have a very courageous conversation, not a criticism, crucial conversation, a courageous conversation that comes from the heart that says, I care about you and I recognize that something's off. I recognize that you're struggling. And I think when we talk about that, I think I want to give all the shifties between you and I a couple of takeaways that can help people as they kind of go through burnout. Because as you know, you don't wake up and you're burned out. It happens over time.
Yes.
And so if we can catch it earlier, people won't be at this point where they're leaving this great profession of healthcare. So one nugget that I want to share with the shifties is, number one, be able to have a courageous conversation if you see a peer struggling. And if you're on the other end of receiving that from someone, receive it in a way that it's a gift, not that it's an insult, not that someone's coming at you. Receive it as a gift. And that's a takeaway. So I'd love for you to share some of your takeaways.
And funnily enough, that was one of them. When you asked me to have a few takeaways, sharing experiences is so important on so many levels. And we're seeing it more, but let's be real, in healthcare, we're still not in that place where people automatically feel comfortable saying, I think I am miserable. I think I'm really struggling. I feel like I'm too cynical. I feel like I'm not showing up the way I need to show up. That's just that was unheard of when you and I started in this field, and it's getting better, but there's still a challenge there. But absolutely, one of my takeaways from over a decade and a half of this work and having gone through burnout a couple of times is shared experiences do more than just offload pressure. That's an important goal. So if you and I are talking about our frustrations, or I'm telling you, gosh, I don't think I'm doing well, or you're saying to me, you seem a little more tired, you seem a little more off, are you okay? Whatever that courageous conversation is, that's offloading a lot of steam. But there's so much downstream that happens from that. And some of your shifties may be on board with me on this and some may not, and that's okay. But I truly believe that when you have those kinds of shared experiences, the energy shifts. So not only personally for us, and there is some literature, by the way, psychologically around this, but not only personally for us in the moment, but when I leave one of those courageous conversations, even if it's been difficult, I am in a different space and in a different sense of openness psychologically for the rest of my day. So there's a downstream domino effect on the rest of my day. Maybe I'm more open with the next person. Maybe they see my light, or they see whatever it is that suddenly I'm not feeling that vibe. But I also believe that there's a change in the energy just in general that is going to move the type of work that we're trying to do forward the more we share those experiences. So I agree with you 100%. That is the first place to start. It's what I tell people who either feel like something is going on, or people who feel like that something's going on with someone else. Just get the conversation started. We're not there to solve all the problems. The second takeaway that I would like to share with you is that this is all incredibly personal. Right. So when I first started looking at all of this and doing all the research and looking at what had been tried and what worked and what didn't work, it felt very like, okay, great. So let's go into an organization and set up X, Y, or Z intervention because X, Y, or Z university tried this and it worked. That's a very cookie cutter approach. And I will say that it has a benefit in terms of sending the message to the workforce that it's a priority for the organization. But it tends not to move the needle so much on the overall sentiment that folks are feeling, okay? And so the type of work that I do is to really work with small groups, departments within an organization, work units, teams, that kind of thing, and find out what is life like for you on this unit. What does it mean to be well on this unit? What are the challenges to that? Because folks who work in the same department are going to have very similar work lives, right? They may all have very unique and personal and individual ideas around what's best for their well-being, but their environment is going to look very similar. And the ability for us to tailor recommendations for a department or a team and then scale them out to a small business, or even have different initiatives in different departments within a small business, is incredible in terms of impact, because you've scaled it, but you've kept it very relevant for that group. So I caution folks to not grasp on to sort of like I said, the cookie cutter kind of initiatives, unless you really feel like, yes, this makes sense for me, this makes sense for my team, and really take the time to find out as much. It's just like patient care, right? So if you and I were seeing 3 different folks with diabetes, we're going to manage them completely differently because they all have different lives. They have different approaches. They have different cultural backgrounds. They have different home situations. And so it's the same thing when we're talking about combating burnout in the healthcare workforce. Let's get as down and dirty into the details as we possibly can and tailor it so it makes sense for that particular person, that particular group.
Is burnout costing your organization its best nurses? How do you know? SC Healthcare can help. Our evidence-based approach helps nurse leaders boost retention, enhance job satisfaction, and elevate patient care quality while reducing burnout at an impressive 52%. You ready to uncover burnout's impact on your team? Visit sehealthcaresolutions.com for the free assessment today. A lot of what I'm hearing you say is peer support. There is incredible power in peer support. It doesn't mean we all get together and we have a whining session, but if we're able to share those stories, share those experiences, and then we can relate to them, there's almost a sense of comfort. And validation. And the other thing, you kind of teed me up perfectly for this one. I'm the Chief Clinical and Innovation Officer at SE Healthcare. You know that. We work together. You do a lot of work. You've contributed expert content that's incredible. I want to shout out that if any of the shifties that are on, if you have a chance and you have our platform, please watch Dr. Rachel Brown talk about work-life balance. It's incredible. The other thing I want to mention is boundaries. I feel like something our shifties might want to recognize. It's challenging, especially as I'm speaking for myself, a female, a mother, to really be able to say, okay, I parked my car in the garage. I'm getting out of the car and I need to leave work in this car. Doesn't come out of the car and go into my house. I need to set boundaries, and I struggle with boundaries. I'm a Gen Xer. I don't know if Gen Xers, I'm generalizing, if we all struggle with boundaries, but I was at the Mayo Clinic, shout out to the Mayo Clinic, and I met this incredibly sweet nurse who shared with me, she's a millennial, and she said, oh, no, I have great boundaries. And I said, you need to teach me about boundaries. So one thing I want the shifties to recognize, it is okay to say no with elegance and grace. It is okay to leave work at work and spend time with your family, your friends. And I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yes, it's such a great topic because it really is at the crux of managing your resilience, right? You cannot, whatever it is you decide to do to maintain your resilience, to keep yourself from feeling toxic or unwell, it starts with setting boundaries, because we only have so much time, we only have so much bandwidth, energy, money, all of that. One thing I will say is also in your enrichment center is a tip on the boundary ritual that Dr. Dyke Drummond did. So if everyone wants to go check that out, it is such a great, could even be a 30-second tool to help you with that exact transition that you're talking about, Andrea, from car to home, home to car, so on and so forth. The other advice that I give folks about boundaries is the not yet advice. So many of us, and I will say in the research, it does show that females that are women in healthcare have a harder time setting boundaries. And that's mostly because of social precedent after really centuries of being told we have to be yes people. One of the things that can be helpful for someone who has a really hard time psychologically saying no is to say not yet. I do it all the time. It feels a little softer to me. It feels a little gentler, but also think of it from this point of view as well. It also keeps that opportunity open, because maybe you do want to be a part of whatever it is you've been asked to do, but maybe you just don't have the bandwidth right now. Maybe you need to see it solidify a little more before you jump onto a crazy bandwagon. And then later you go, actually, I think this project might take off. Let me be a part of that. So not yet is a great way to really address both sides of that coin and not get yourself overwhelmed and overtasked.
Okay, I have to, this is really funny. I'm sitting here, I'm smiling when you're saying this, because you truly are a woman of your word. When I started stalking you
you didn't stalk me.
I didn't really stalk you, but we had a really meaningful connection. It's super healthy. But I remember asking you about developing more of your content, because your content is so incredible, Rachel.
Thank you.
And you said, you're welcome. And you said to me, not yet. And so there was about a 3-4 month time where we really didn't correspond with one another. But by saying not yet, you left the opportunity door open, window open, however you want to say it. And then we reconnected. And here we are on the podcast. Here we are collaborating in the Enrichment Center. We have a lot of work going on. So I love saying not yet. So that's really powerful. Thank you.
It's wonderful. And listen, as a kid, I learned, and I can say this because I'm not in the best time of my life right now. And yet I hope that I'm sharing with you and all the shifties that that's okay. You can be in a rough patch in your life and still be open to the kinds of things we're talking about, setting boundaries, collaborating, pursuing your passion, making sure that you're caring for others. You can do all of that. But I say that so that people don't think, oh, geez, she's just saying that because life is good. But we learned when we were kids that if you kind of wait, things sort of work out, right? And then somewhere in there, we, especially those of us in healthcare, because we tend to be type A's, and if you happen to be a mom, maybe that added another layer of, oh my gosh, I need to have everything under control, or you're taking care of elderly parents, or, have someone that needs a lot of attention in your life, that sort of thing. We got to that place where we just wanted a death grip on control of our lives. And I have to remind myself, I've been around on the planet long enough to know if I just sit still for a second, things tend to work out. And because I knew I would not be able to give you and anyone else who has, need for this content that I want to give you, I wouldn't be able to do it the way I wanted to do it and make it meaningful for you all. I said, you know what? Not yet. I'm not in that space. But guess what, shifties? I am in the space, and I have been asked to do it, and it will be coming. So it's just a matter of knowing when you're living in your own value space, understanding life is life, and you've got to do the things that life hands you. Things just tend to kind of fall in alignment. That's honestly, Andrea, why I believe that all that we do and influence even our conversation right now, folks who watch this later on, these shared experiences, they're going to feel that shift. They're going to feel that energy shift. And if they're open to it, things fall into place.
Rachel, thank you so much for everything that you do in healthcare, for what you do for the world, because you are a bright, shining star. I so appreciate and value everything. I'm looking forward to you coming back on the show. And
I would love to.
I would love it. The shifties would love it. And then I just want to say to the shifties, remember, your shift makes the difference. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify The Shift today.